So we want to thank our Patreon supporters as well as our subscribers. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy our show. So the focus of our conversation today is the fact that we have different sort of beats that we look at, be it the semi-truck or the Cybertruck or the different cars that Tesla produces. Today's focus is on kind of Bob Lutz, because we haven't heard from him in about 6 months. The last time he showed up on CNBC was just after Tesla's last earnings, and we really haven't heard any more from him since. I believe there may be two components to why this is the case. The first is that in Bob Lutz's last comments, what he shared was that Tesla is now starting to behave like a real car company. What he explained that meant was the fact that they had talked about coming out with a $35,000 vehicle, and that price point was unsustainable for a company to stay in business revenue and profit-wise. What he indicated was the fact that their average vehicle sell price is about $57,000 suggests that Tesla was sort of making moves in a way that was consistent with a company that was going to make the kind of money necessary to stay in business. So it seems to me that, comments that were sort of supporters of Tesla may be the reason why CNBC might have chosen to not really want to give him any more love, if you will. But the second component of this, and what we really wanted to focus on as our conversation for today, is kind of what's happening with GM. So a lot of our viewers have talked about the fact that they didn't know why we made a focus on Bob Lutz. Number one, Bob was a key participant in the destruction of the first EV vehicles from GM. Upon seeing Elon Musk's first Roadster, he moved GM back into engineering studies focused on preparing to offer electric vehicles. So the Bolt and its predecessor were both concept cars that were introduced by Bob Lutz and then are still in place. So one of our focus points on him is that the entire OEM large auto industry, they all kind of watch each other, and whatever one is doing, the others try to make an effort to reply, in kind. So what we were looking at here is the fact that, hey, we might not like Bob Lutz or what he has to say about Tesla and the EV industry, but to a large extent, it was him that helped facilitate it happening. Another facilitation method that Bob Lutz caused was that one of the reasons Elon was excited about working on putting together an electric vehicle was studying those that had gotten the initial EV and were so happy with their vehicles even after they were taken away and crushed, that he actually pointed out that their enthusiasm for a vehicle that was as poor performing as that vehicle was an illustration for him as to why it was that there was a mandate to go ahead and produce electric vehicles and get them out into the marketplace. So sort of in a backdoor kind of way, it's interesting to watch Bob actually have an influence on Tesla's existence and success. So where we're at now is really fascinating. Bob had indicated that what the OEMs had determined was that the structure of 25% vertical integration that General Motors and other manufacturers have is ideal for a number of reasons. As I did some research with friends, one of the points that was made to me was that Elon is going to have a problem going forward, which is that there are a number of ways in which Tesla is doing research and has delivered products, be it autonomous vehicles, batteries, motors. There are all these different ways in which Tesla has had to kind of go from scratch to deliver the quality and kind of vehicles that they want to see. And so this problem has emerged, which is how is Tesla going to keep going to stay at the leading edge of performance for all these different fields going forward? And the answer is that the OEMs have been using is this the non-vertical integration, i.e. 25% of what goes into a car being produced by these organizations has been the solution that they've come up with. And each of the large organizations have adopted this. So one of the ways in which we're deviating from Bob's logic that's key is Bob was saying that the large OEMs had been making a point of avoiding battery production, one, because they don't know how to do it well, but two, because in the vertical integration process, Bob/the large OEMs expected for particularly the battery component of vertical integration to become an anvil around the neck of Tesla. So what would happen is that the large Asian manufacturers, particularly Korean manufacturers, would start delivering very large amount of batteries, and batteries would become a commodity. And now you're in a position where Tesla has all that investment in a large production facility for batteries, and they are now in a commodity business where there are other entities that are larger that can provide cheaper, so it becomes, in essence, a cost anvil around the company's neck. And so this kind of explains one of the reasons why the CEO of GM, when she had an opportunity and got $2 billion from the sale of her European operations, elected to return that capital to shareholders. I guess it was 2.5 years ago. And now, instead of continuing down that path, GM has now completely switched directions, where they now have a deal with LG to actually build a battery factory in a place called Lordstown, Ohio. So we're kind of fascinated by this because all of a sudden companies that were saying that they don't want vertical integration have now been starting to join Tesla in the vertical integration process. I'm excited for GM because there's some concern I have, which is the fact that when you have your own battery production, you can do modifications of that production in ways that can enable you to differentiate your vehicles towards certain markets, be it people driving trucks or people driving very small cars, whatever it might be. You can now flex your production without having to go outside to a supplier. So as you may recall, one of the main reasons Tesla is in that 75% vertical integration zone is innovation. Whenever you have outside production, it's a very lengthy process to go through the process of delivering to deliver new innovations. And so you're having to do specs, have them produced out of house and then brought back in, and you systematically get a new solution. In the setup that Tesla has, they can very easily redesign things that don't work or add things that they think would enhance the ownership experience. And this allows them a competitive advantage because they can get to market quicker with newer solutions, but it has a disadvantage because you have to maintain the cost of this facility in-house, which obviously drives up your cost of execution as a drawback. But Tesla is working it well, and in particular they're working well because there's a concept that in business that's called the second mover advantage. So in essence, part of Bob Lutz's strategy for how Tesla would go out of business is that there's a concept called a second mover. So the first mover, being Tesla in this case, would have the large OEMs simply replicate its structure and then systematically put it out of business. Well, there's a problem that kind of ran into, which is it takes 2 or 3 years to build a battery facility. So yes, those companies can move in with their second mover advantage, but usually second mover advantage is something you could get to and implement in a fairly short period of time, and that allows you to potentially sort of wipe out that competitor in the process. And it's kind of hard to do that when you have 3 years. In fact, the second mover advantage that is somewhat held by non-Tesla companies hasn't been working out. NIO, there's a whole bunch of Chinese manufacturers and European manufacturers that have not been successful in getting a product to market for a number of reasons, especially because of the software side of that battery production. So we already covered the fact that there's also an interesting phenomenon going on, which is that in the case of other manufacturers, they're sole source reliant on one entity, be it LG or Samsung or others, to produce their battery supply. And this hasn't worked out very well for a number of reasons, as you know. Number one, there's a triage process going on right now where each of the manufacturers is getting a small amount of batteries, so it limits the number of cars they can put on the streets. Number two, they're also having problems with the fact that they can't get the range because they don't have the software that Tesla has. And then number three, there's an evolution going on of what the batteries are actually going to look like. Samsung and LG in particular being the leader of who the large OEMs are using, is in an interesting position where they switch from 4 or 5 large packs inside the battery, and as they've made their charger or charging pack supercharged capable, they're up to 450 small packs, which gives better functionality than large packs in terms of the supercharging process and the overheating of the battery. But it ends up being kind of a very tough situation for them to respond when it's not, when the structure that Tesla has of small incremental batteries, they can't really make that work cost-wise, performance-wise yet. So the second mover advantage that should have been there is basically not working out. So we're intrigued because basically what's happened is GM has abandoned Bob Lutz's strategy. As you know, they're building a rather large SUV with large numbers of batteries in a Hummer to start their sort of comeback, if you will. And then we're going to see other products that they deliver over time. But in essence, they're in a very tough position right now because Tesla has and is taking more and more market share. They're lowering their cost of operation. They're doing multi-sources for their batteries, which even slows down the fact that Tesla is consuming more batteries for their solution from other manufacturers, reduces battery count available for competitors to enter to compete with them. So the long list of disasters for competitors that are large OEMs like a VW or Mercedes or GM for that matter, that long list of challenges for second mover results in Tesla having a wide open field to keep delivering successful products and solutions that they obviously can't get from any place else. So I wanted to kind of review all of this with you today because our Bob Lutz update is that Bob definitely defined the space in terms of how the OEMs would respond. As he said, the reason why they did the Chevy Bolt and fairly inexpensive vehicles was that they felt like the environmentalists who might drive those vehicles are fairly low on resources, and so they need a very inexpensive vehicle. So that's why they were trying to get a vehicle out as low a cost as possible. The issue, though, is that I've been very surprised because he's been gone for so long that we haven't seen a process by which the OEMs have maybe put the Chevy Bolt drivetrain inside of a Cadillac body and charge more for it because they would have to, but now they could actually appeal to the customers they may have been buying the Tesla vehicles. So I'm kind of fascinated by this because it's a huge deal for a company GM's size and power to do an about face on the battery production being out of house, and most of the changes they're making embrace Tesla's logic. The one other note I wanted to make is Ford has made a decision to go ahead with their new Mustang of doing the $500 registration fees that Tesla is doing in terms of deposits on their vehicles. So it's amazing to watch Tesla, in essence, teach an old dog new tricks when it was suggested that the old dogs would teach Tesla a number of new tricks and, in essence, force them out of business over time. So a lot of interesting, points going on here. I want to thank Bob for making an effort to give us fodder for how the future might look, and thank him for helping Tesla get rolling as the EV was there, and then he canceled it, and instead of it dying a slow death, it went out the way it did. I have to say, though, that one of the shows that we're looking forward to in our next Bob Lutz series is just the fact that, if in fact electric vehicles were being, solutions were being developed and destroyed by GM and others on a consistent basis over the last 70 years, there's an interesting question that comes up is, was it that those vehicles were non-viable, A, or B, did those manufacturers know that electric vehicles would destroy their business? And one of the ways they could make sure that it didn't happen was by the destruction process they kept doing to be at around the city, sort of overhead rail electric, or in vehicles, continue to destroy them, sell more vehicles, and prevent electric from coming in and destroying their primary business. So this is, I think, another sort of interesting caveat that's worth exploring, because GM had the opportunity to be way ahead. But I distinctly remember studying that EV vehicle from afar and just determining that it was fairly ugly, etc. It was what's called a compliance car, where the folks in California were forcing them to deliver a vehicle that would comply with certain rules. And so the net effect of the whole thing was that, as you know, the vehicle was, they were all lease only. The leases were pulled back in, and then they destroyed the cars. And all the owners who had purchased them were extremely happy and had post-death parties on behalf of their vehicles, which Elon cited as part of the reason why he really wanted to make an effort when it came to electric vehicles. So again, thanks, Bob. Your destroying EVs encouraged Tesla to go for it, and hopefully, those guys will be able, at GM and others, will be able to deliver products that customers can use and want to own, versus sort of jettisoning anything that's domestically produced. So as we close out our show for today, I wanted to note, I'm going to show you photos here of the Susquehanna as we close out. I was impressed to learn that the waters here in northern Maryland, just about into Delaware, are nice enough. We now have the dog from next door has decided he's coming after me. Anyway, I do have this down, either trained dogs or other items, but luckily we're at the end of our show today. I'm going to give you, a look around in our area, because I think it's one of the most beautiful parts of the country. And for staycations, it's definitely a worthwhile consideration. The train tracks you see behind me move north and south between New York and DC, primarily with train traffic, and we're grateful that it didn't show up against our show today. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Please remember 25 leg lifts a day to help with potential knee issues as you age. Also want to encourage you to a 30 SPF or better. Also wanted to encourage you perhaps some weightlifting once or twice a week to help maintain bone density. We also want to encourage you a half-hour walk a day would be helpful health-wise, and a little power walk action there. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, mach's gut. German, au revoir. French, lehitrot. Hebrew, Hoda Hafez. Farsi, and in Jamaica, and hey do. Zdravstvuyte in Russian. And in Jamaica we say enough respect, walk good man. Have a great day. Bye for now, and thanks for joining us.